There's always a percentage in underperforming businesses of people in there who actually quite like seeing it doing so badly, and actually reveling in the fact that this is rubbish and telling everybody it's hopeless, etc.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Recruiting Alchemy. I am delighted to say that today I'm joined by Dan Taylor of Morgan Hunt's recruitment guru, veteran, enthusiastic cricketer, drummer, and I'm really interested to hear your story and all about the journey you've been on. It's a storied one. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Great to be here.
Thank you very much. So look, we don't know each other. Our paths have never crossed, which is getting more and more unusual as I get older. There's not many people left that I haven't come across in some way. So firstly, it's great to connect. I'm really grateful for you coming in. But I guess to start us off, tell us this story of where it all began.
Gosh, well, I don't think many people know, but I was born in a little village called Little Lever, which is between Bolton and Bury, which is in now part of Greater Manchester, but we always refer to it as Lancashire.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, to me that would be Lancashire.
That's Lancashire, yeah. And my mum and dad had always lived in the village, as did their mums and dads.
Oh, so mining?
So it was paper mills in Little Lever. And my grandfather on my mother's side, his job was delivering coal to the village on a horse-drawn cart.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're probably going to talk about AI at some stage and how that's wiping out jobs. That wasn't a career to go into at that stage. But he got taken out by the petrol motor. But my mum and dad lived up there. My dad was a journalist and he'd worked on big newspapers, mainly out of Manchester. But at this stage, he was the editor of the Wigan Evening Post and Chronicle, which early 70s, it was the heyday of local newspapers. Anyway, so I was brought up in this sort of relatively quiet Lancashire town.
But is that not quite a juxtaposition? You know, a professional journalist born into what sounds like a very working class community. Is that normal? Was that normal for your father, or was he the outlier?
He was the outlier. He was in a breakout role, so he had that, and then he got a big job in Fleet Street.
Okay, right.
So at the age of 9, I moved from Little Lever, Lancashire, where everyone speaks like this. And I turned up in Hove on the south coast next to Brighton.
I mean, that is quite the transition.
It was crucial for me because I think one of the reasons I became a successful recruiter was I turned up at a school on a Monday morning with this northern accent and people looked at me like I'd come from the moon.
Yeah.
And I had to engage with this group of, fellow students at the age of 9. And it was a real challenge for me because I was this oddity who just turned up. And I replaced a lad in the class who was highly popular and he'd moved somewhere else.
Right.
And it was, who was this guy?
Yeah.
And I was desperately searching to kind of make a mark and get in with this gang. And that's where cricket came along.
Right.
And I remember one games lesson, my sportsmaster said to the whole group, has anyone here played cricket? And nobody put their hand up. And I have an older brother who's 8 years older than me. And I'd played in the back garden with him and his cousins. And I said, I play cricket. And then suddenly I had to become it.
Sport is the breaker of divides in those scenarios, right?
It is. And somehow it was another part of my journey, really. I just turned myself mentally into a cricketer. And it was the way I had to go forward in the world, really. But that whole sort of process of effectively emigrating in those days from the north of England to the south and trying to break in, make friends and be part of something, you learn all the skills to be a successful recruiter, how to get on with people, how to strike up a conversation with people you'd never met before or never had any sort of joint shared experience.
Bullied?
Not really. I mean, I probably more left out to begin with. Yeah. Bullying was a bit strong, maybe on the odd occasion, but not much.
The reason I ask is I was born in Glasgow.
Wow.
And I left. My father got a job and it's a mad story, but I had this mad. They were engineers from Govan, and they used to bring. He worked in a dairy, and they used to bring these machines from Toronto, and they made. When you go to a service station, you get little pots of milk.
Yeah.
They made them in this machine.
Wow.
And then anyway, every time the machine broke, they had to send a guy from Canada. So one day, some guy shows up and he says, "Look, the boss has said, do you want to be our man on the ground in the UK? Because they can't afford to send him from Canada." He said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, no problem. They'll offer you a job. The only condition is you need to move somewhere more central." And this was 1986. They got a road atlas out and they looked on the map and they said, Stoke-on-Trent is in the middle of the country. And we just moved there.
Wow.
Mental. They'd never been there.
Yeah.
They didn't know anyone there. So I show up, 8 years old. I've got this mad Glaswegian accent in the middle of Stoke-on-Trent. And it was the most torturous experience of my life because and actually I've lost the accent. My brother was 3 years older. He still got his. And I think there was something about a desperation to fit in and just be a bit the same. But for me, there was a bunch, it was definitely, if somebody said, "Were you bullied?" the answer would be a firm yes.
Right. Okay.
So that was my experience.
It's very similar, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But don't you think it's pivotal, that step?
For me, it was it was the making of me, right?
Yeah.
Resilience, my ability to overcome, but also humor, right?
Yeah.
You overcome that by becoming I'm not saying I was a funny guy, but you would use humor as a way to deflect that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. So Lancashire to Hove via Fleet Street.
Yeah.
You're now are you a Brighton boy today?
So I've pretty much lived in Brighton ever since.
Right.
So I started off supporting Bolton Wanderers, which I fiercely did when they were in the Premier League 20 years ago. I can't believe it's so long ago. But now I've been in and out with Brighton throughout, but I'm now a season ticket holder at Brighton.
Seagulls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Congratulations having a storming time of it.
Oh, it's so wonderful to watch it happen in front of you. And I do remember being at the Withdean Stadium. For those people who are not footballers, they won't like this. But I was sat it was New Year's Eve, and I was sat on a scaffold round a racing track in the rain, watching them throw away a 2-0 lead.
Yeah, I've been to the Withdean twice. I'm a Port Vale fan.
Wow.
And I don't go to the home games, but since I lived in London over 20 years, and I would go to I'll go to an away game within an hour. This was back when you were rubbish.
Yeah.
The Withdean was terrible.
It was dreadful.
And anyway, I just remember the steward said something like, "This is the lowest away attendance we've ever had." I think it was 80 of us. We were like a League Two side. We weren't like proper. I've seen bigger crowds at amateur football. We were terrible. But anyway, we digress. So Brighton is home, and then tell us from there. So
lots of things went on. I left school at 16.
Right.
And I joined what was known as the YTS, Youth Training Scheme, for TSB Trust Card, which was the credit card side of the TSB Bank. Credit cards were kind of pretty new in the sort of mid-80s.
Right, okay.
And I got a classic apprenticeship there. I did much worse in my O-levels than everybody expected.
Including you?
Including me.
Right.
It was pretty much my dad said, "Right, you need to get a job then. Stop mucking around with this." And I did. And I just thrived. It was a big office in Brighton. And I just love watching how it all worked and seeing how the interactions between the various people in the office played out, a bit of the politics and who would succeed and who wouldn't succeed and who should have succeeded but didn't. So I just soaked it all up like a sponge. And I did that for 3 years, working in various different areas. And then I worked for another sort of financial institution in Brighton. Brighton used to be packed full of them, those sort of big clerical offices of the early 90s. And I just didn't like it. Right. Meanwhile, I was playing drums in a band and cricket as well. And I thought, I'm just doing this work thing until I hit the big time, basically. That was my...
One or the other.
Yeah, exactly. I've got it all covered.
Exactly.
Don't worry.
Something's going to come up. Hedge my bets.
And neither did in the end. So one of the things I did is I went out, I got a job for a year in a hotel activity centre, which was in the Wye Valley which is on the border of England and Wales.
Yeah.
And this was, just south from there, St Brevels, if anybody knows that area. It's beautiful, yeah. And also not particularly popular. So I worked in St Brevels at this very unusual country house hotel. And I turned up and they said, right, you're the social organiser. Your job is to organise special interest breaks over the next year.
But hold on, what was your actual job then?
That's what it turned out to be,
right,
you know.
Okay.
So
this is just a random, I'm just going to go there and see what happens.
Yeah. So I lived out there for a year in the hotel. They paid me £4,200 to live in there and do it.
Right.
And 1 week it would be homes and gardens, where I'd be taking OAPs round sort of stately homes and looking at the gardens. Next week would be May half term, and there'd be loads of kids in, and you'd have to organise games and activities.
And what are you thinking? Are you thinking a career in tourism, leisure and tourism is your future, or are you just like, I'll just see what happens?
So the plan was, the bass player we had in our band decided to leave. We got somebody and he wasn't right. So I said, look, I'm going to go off. If you guys can sort it out, I'll come back.
Right.
And they did. And we got somebody else in, and we did it for a couple more years after that.
Right.
But the trigger that got me back, because I was living a kind of, you know, out in the wilderness lifestyle at this hotel, was an old mate of mine who I'd known since I was 16, who worked at Montrose, which was part of the Hayes Group at that stage. They'd recently taken them over. And he said, look, you could do this. You need to come back to do a proper job. So I went for the interview, got the job. And in January 1996, I joined Montrose as a recruitment consultant.
Got it. And that was the first chapter of the book.
It was, yeah. We were off and running.
Off and running. In Brighton?
In Brighton.
In Brighton.
So it was a 5-man office. I was the 5th. And because I was the newest person in, I had to sit on the broken chair, which gave me dreadful backache.
You wouldn't get away with that now.
I mean, the abuse I received.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody doesn't get a brand new chair these days, they're like, "What is this place?" You know.
Exactly. Yeah. And everybody smoked from 8 in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and they had
in the office.
In the office.
Mad.
So pubs had Foster's ashtrays. I don't remember it.
Yeah. Square blue.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. And each of them had one of those trays, and the cleaner would come in, I don't know, first thing in the morning, clean them all out. And by the time we left the office, at whatever Lord knows time that was, there'd be this pile.
God.
And I'd go home stinking a fag.
You didn't smoke?
Bad back, didn't smoke. And I'd lived this kind of sort of puritanical life in the Wye Valley.
All of a sudden, the Wye Valley seems like a long time ago.
Why am I doing this?
Yeah. So you joined Montrose. You'd never done sales, right? From what I can tell. Or had you?
No, not really, no.
You'd done some office work, but never sales.
Yeah.
You had your little foray into the countryside. But yeah, tell us about that journey, because you end up doing 15 years at Hayes.
Yeah, 15 years.
A long stretch, a long career there.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that.
Sure. Well, I had that same really difficult 3 months that everybody has. And I remember the day of my 3-month review, as everybody does in those days, because it was so much of a process in those days, and it was just beaten actually physically into you. I mean, we were talking about bullying earlier. That was probably the time I was bullied more than ever.
Yeah.
But it made a man of me, you know, effectively. And I've looked back at it fondly now, although I hated it at the time. So I got that, and then I passed it, and I managed to pick up this crazy job at Cardiff City Council. And you know when you don't know anything, and I said to the guy, what should I charge? And he shouted across some ludicrous rate that there was no way I was going to get away with. And the guy went, and I quoted it, and the guy went, yeah, all right then. And I made a fortune in my 3rd month without really knowing what I was doing. And then it all went quiet again. And then a particular job came up 6 months into my career, which something about it, I just sensed there was an opportunity in this role. Right. And a particular difficult conversation went on about a behind your back temp to perm. And my boss was going to go down to the meeting, and I said, no, I want to do it. That's my client.
Right.
And I went down and had the conversation, and I got on really well with the project director of this job. And I ended up with sort of 120 guys on this one job.
Wow.
And it nearly killed me. The whole process, the stress of it, and payroll issues, all that kind of stuff.
Temp, like high volume temp stuff.
High volume temp stuff. And it was all the way through the summer. I'd get into the office at sort of 7:45 in the morning, and I would work non-stop. I'd just go out for a sandwich till 7:30 in the evening and just collapse. But that one job got me, enough to buy my first flat, And I thought, this is amazing. Every job I fill, I get a little bit of it. And I wasn't even sure what bit of it I got. I knew it wasn't very much, but I knew I got more every time I filled a job. So I was just hooked on it, and I saw this as a way out, a future for me.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Have you always done public sector?
No, so I started off construction.
Right.
Which was
so
pretty
you said project
fierce.
director, that was construction.
That was, construction. Right. That was a big project in Brighton, student accommodation block.
Yeah.
And then I went on to that, and then I went on to, run a small team, hire some people, and then I went on to manage the office. And I had a couple of years where we just ripped it up. And I worked with a tremendous bunch. There was about 10 or 15 of us. And it was just electric. And we won all the awards, and I was too big for my own boots, way too cocky.
You just can't put a foot wrong, can you? Your shit, it doesn't matter, your shit just don't stink. I have similar memories of a chapter of my career that just, I'm sure we look back with rose-tinted spectacles, but I remember it just being amazing, But you found a home at Hayes at this point.
Very much so. So I was incredibly impressed with the people I worked with. I had directors who would come down to Brighton like once a month. They'd do the classic, helicopter management, dive in and smash the place up. And I was like, wow, these guys are amazing. Could I do that? And I remember I'd been with the company about 6 months. I went to a company conference. I'd never seen anything like this. They'd hired a university. They did all these presentations. At that stage, the managing director of Montrose was a guy called Rob Smith, who's pretty sort of legendary in the recruitment sphere. And Rob came running down the stairs from the back of the hall. All these spotlights went on him, and the whole crowd like, wow, who's this guy? And I thought, God, I'd love to do that job. And again, when you look back on your career, that was a sort of penny drop moment where, a vision was formed in my head of potentially where I could go and what I could do.
Got it. And you moved to London, or you commuted?
So I got told that there was a really big problem up there, and they said, my boss at the time said, right, go up there, sort it out. And I went and did it, and the plan was, I did consider moving up there, but...
Where were you living at this point?
I was still living in Brighton. Brighton and Hove are now the same thing now. And, but I just had too many calls, all my mates down there, I was playing cricket down there, and I just loved that city so much, and particularly in the summer, when it's hard work and stressful in London, you get back on the train, on a Friday evening, and the doors open, and you just get that sniff of a sea breeze, and you think, I can switch off a bit now.
Exactly. So you found a home at Hayes. Your career is going from strength to strength. You've come to London to tackle this toxic, this unruly gang in London. Did they receive you well, and how does it all go?
No, I was definitely seen as the outsider, but it was very much, I was just so full of positivity and energy. I kind of beat them down and won them over.
Right.
And I did really well in a 9-month blitz, and I was really happy with this business I had, and it had gone from massively underperforming to doing really well. And then they did the transfer and gave me another sort of crappy bit of business to go at as well, which was that business was toxic as well. But we turned it around, and that was kind of a feature of my career, particularly at that sort of stage, given something that's broken and going, right, sort it out.
And is it always a culture, people problem? Is it a strategy thing? Is it a market thing? Is it a bit of everything?
Always people, number one.
Yeah.
And you can't do it with people who don't want to do it. And I think, there's always a percentage in underperforming businesses of people in there who actually quite like seeing it doing so badly, and actually reveling in the fact that this is rubbish and telling everybody it's hopeless, etc. And you've got to get to those guys quickly.
Yeah. Are you a good firer?
Well, I've clearly had to fire a lot down the years. Well, I never shy away from it. It's not somebody else's job. It's always mine. So I always look them in the eye and tell them why. And at times I've had to make redundancies, when it's not been the individual's fault. Far from it. And then it's really important that I face up to that and talk it through. And I've been made redundant myself. I was made redundant from Hayes in the end. And it's a difficult thing to go through, and it needs to be managed well.
Yeah, because I think if I had one weakness, is probably not the right word, but I was never a good fighter. I always left it too long.
Yeah,
I was always too eager to give somebody one more chance. Or the truth is, people show you who they are.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they say; it's how they behave. And you're exactly right. Misery loves company, right? It's like, there's always a little gang of people going around. Oh, it's shit here, isn't it? Have you heard about this guy down there? He's making loads more, or whatever it might be. And of course, invariably, it always is the same story, right? They go on, they do 6 or 9 months elsewhere, then they move on again, and actually it's that person that was always the problem. And I think if I had my time again, I'd be a little bit faster on that sometimes. So your Hayes journey comes to an end.
Yep.
Through redundancy.
Yeah, in 2011.
2011. So you made it through the hardest part, but then there was that second wave of turmoil, wasn't there?
Yeah.
You had Lehman's, and then you had that second crisis, 2010, where, what was your, because were you in construction at Hayes during Lehman's?
Yeah, so 2008, the credit crunch, I was in construction, and I got moved again to look after the white collar space.
Right.
And one of the big parts of the components of that business was architecture.
Right.
And the first thing that goes in any recession is architecture, right? Yeah. People stop the fancy designs.
That's it, yeah.
So that went, and it was dealing with that whole thing. And at that stage, my wife had just given birth to twins.
Oh, wow.
So I was having to deal with parenthood of twins, commuting up to London after about 3 hours sleep, and going into this sort of torched, barren landscape of a market.
Oh, what was it? Take me back to Hay on Wye.
I know, exactly. That was quite a challenge to get through that, but we got through it, And I think the only good thing about that is it was apocalyptic almost instantly. But then after about 3 to 6 months, there were little shoots, and it started the trend back upwards.
Yeah.
Whilst what we're in at the moment is nowhere near as sort of, final and full stop, it just seems to be dragging on and on and on.
You've got to be a certain age and been around to remember Lehman's. I remember it as just like a hammer. Yeah. But it did recover, whereas this recovery seems to be sticky and slow. That recovery came. So anyway, and then obviously end of Hayes, and that was the beginning of your journey at Morgan Hunt. Is that right?
No. So at that stage, I'd become pretty sick of Hayes, and I wasn't particularly on board with the direction of the company and where it was going. I felt I was being pushed much more into a sort of sterile spreadsheet-based world.
Right.
And the things which brought the company so much magic during the early part of my career seemed to be voided and just wiped away. And at that stage, it was pretty much the rise of the boutiques. And I thought they were much better than we were in terms they were closer to the client. They were out there, they understood it, they could be really fleet of foot in terms of switching strategy or making sure they were offering the right service.
Yeah.
So a bunch of guys who I had worked with before then reached out to me and said, do you want to come in and help us out a bit?
Got it.
And they probably wanted a bit of grey hair. Yes, I was grey even then. And I worked for those guys for a bit. And after about 18 months, I was probably too much for the size of the business they were at that stage.
Got it.
And I moved to another one for 6 months, didn't work out. And I thought, look, at that stage, I'd seen the two sides of the recruitment industry.
Yeah.
One was the big corporate.
Yeah.
And, your experience at S3 won't be too dissimilar to mine in terms of good training, good people around you, good systems, good branding, good process, global network, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the small businesses, which were kind of fleet of foot, aspirational, really cut and thrust. You really do live and die on what you bring in.
Yeah.
So I'd seen those two sides, and Morgan Hunt came out of nowhere, really. And what it proved to be was exactly what I was after, which was the bit in the middle. So it kind of feels corporate from the outside. If you look at the branch structure, the systems within the business, the sort of people who work there, most of them have that big corporate background in terms of the executive and director group. Yet it still retains that fleet of foot, sort of boutique-y, let's go and do it type mentality, which is what I love, you know, and I was really lucky and happy I found it.
Amazing. And tell us about the company then.
Okay, so the company then, it wasn't really till I'd worked for the company for about 3 weeks when I realised it was a completely public sector business. So,
and you've never done public sector before?
No, I had done public sector. So
okay.
I had a good knowledge of public sector, but I had a particular division which they called technical, which was a bit of construction, a bit of civil engineering, a bit of rail, a bit of social housing. It was quite an odd mixture, which had been underperforming. They wanted me to come in and sort it out. And then it was, I've done this before. Yeah. Those people over there are trying to pull us down. Yeah. Those people over there are unloved and actually have some talent and capability, you know, and just do the right things. And off we go again. Yeah. And 2011 to 2013 were kind of a great time because it was the end of the coalition government. And nobody wanted to upset the voter. So there was lots of money going to the public sector pending the next election. Which Osborne and Cameron won, and then introduced austerity. But at that time, there was a nice bubble in public sector recruitment.
But was there not a rush to public sector recruitment post Lehman's?
Yes.
Because I remember there was a mandate that went out that said every brand needs to have a public sector division by Monday because banking's tech. And all of a sudden we were selling to, we didn't know what we were doing. I remember going to the London Borough of Camden NHS Trust, right? It was like a foreign land to me. I'd been recruiting for Enron 5 minutes earlier. And I remember just thinking, what is going on here? Like, you know, walking through a hospital and just being like thinking, I don't know how these things work or anything about that. And I think what was clear is that the powers that be at the time, I was much more junior then, but they evidently seen public sector as a safe haven in what was a crumbling and economy in turmoil. But it sounds like you, maybe you'll tell me this in a minute, but is public sector at the mercy of political cycles? Is that part of the journey of being a public sector recruiter?
To a certain extent. So if you take things like a big recession, there's elements of our business that actually jump forward. Right. So, for instance, one of the things we do is we supply assessors to revenues and benefits departments within councils. Right. And when everybody's claiming extra benefit, you know, it's our guys that are often at the end of it, sort of deciding who gets what.
Right. Okay.
So it's always fluctuations. What always happens in a downturn is that the big corporates, private sector corporates, always go, right, we're going to be a public sector business. That always happens. Yeah. And we always know they're coming after our lunch. Yeah. So as the years go by, you develop sort of, you know, defensive mechanisms in there and traps for the other guys you know, when things get bad.
And I mean, let's move on to talk about Morgan Hunt today then, because to me, as the world has moved on, maybe this is depending on your political leanings, right? As the world has become more bureaucratic, doing business with the public sector has become harder. Frameworks and, you know, all of these different things you need, certifications and stuff like that. It feels harder than ever to just turn up and do spot business in the public sector. Yeah. Right or wrong?
I'd totally agree. Yeah. I mean, you know, all good recruiters, when you've got that cracking candidate, the one that makes the real difference. Yeah. You know, if you've got the gift, you know, there's always somebody who's prepared to bend a rule or allow an exception to get somebody in. But it's tough to do regular business unless you're part of them, which is one of the challenges of running a business, because you always go a bit native if you're not careful.
Yeah, but what's great about that is there is moat there, right?
There is.
You can't just, I couldn't, you know, the challenge I think for lots of recruitment companies is little Jimmy, who's doing really well, can start little Jimmy Associates tomorrow morning and do just as well on his own. That's just a reality, right? Yeah. And there's very little, if any, moat that stops him doing that. He gets one big fat commission check and off he goes. He's doing it for himself. It's not so easy to do that in public sector. I'm sure it's not impossible, But is that something you experience as an organisation? Is there a flood of new entrants into the market in the same way there might be in other sectors?
Not really, no.
Right.
One, that they're probably more loyal in terms of their supply list. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're under a lot of pressure at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, budgets are tight.
Yeah.
So they're constantly looking about how they can ease the pressure on their finances. So if somebody's got a particular, cheap solution where they can get what they want, they're all ears, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard to bust in there and go, right, that's mine now.
Yeah. And the public sector's a big world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's if we look at central, local government, and then you've got defence and you've got everything that goes around that. Tell us a bit about how do you use, you're a large, would you consider yourself as a large organisation?
Medium, probably.
Medium, 160 people?
Yeah.
Bigger than your average staffing business, right?
Yeah.
How do you decide where to deploy your energy and effort?
Yeah.
In this enormous landscape, maybe not $1 trillion market, but certainly multi-billion dollars of the grand public sector as it might be.
Well, that's a real challenge, and it's a real challenge particularly when things get tight. Because, as you quite rightly say, the public sector is enormous, and the challenge is always to go down the road and maybe knock on that door for a change and see what that brings. But proper recruitment success lies in that classic niche, the expertise, sticking to your knitting, doing the stuff that you do better than anybody else.
The riches are in the niches.
Absolutely,
as they say in America, as our American friends would say.
Right, yeah.
And so when you say a niche, then are you tactical about that?
Yeah.
Or are you, do you allow people to go off the reservation and then find out that actually, oh God, such and such has found a seam here in something, or is it more, no, this is our strategy, this is how we operate, these are the niches we work in, don't vary from that?
Okay, so it's kind of both.
Right.
We focus people on their specific area. At the same time, what happens in the public sector is it's a bit like musical chairs, where we're running around the chairs until the music stops. In other words, the funding stops in a particular place.
Yeah.
And you'll dive onto the funding.
Yeah.
So, for instance, one of our big markets is the UK colleges.
Right.
Not universities, colleges.
Yeah.
Which is a very unique marketplace. Now, every now and again, the government goes, look, this is a really important part of our strategy. Let's put some more money into that, and then you need to understand what revenue stream is going in there.
Right.
So it might be to extra support for students with special education needs and disabilities.
Yeah.
So then you've got to be really focused on that and jump into that area.
And in that scenario, are you, do you sit around waiting for the budget every year thinking, right, where we go, what's happening for us next?
Mixture. So we do that, but at the same time, we're conscious we've just got to plough our own furrow, really.
Yeah.
You've got to have sort of long-term vision for some of those markets and where you're going to be.
Yeah.
So a classic one is we got news yesterday that the NHS has cut £1 billion of agency spend. Right. So we moved out of the NHS largely 3 years ago.
Right. Because
we could just see it going off, and what they wanted was literally CV pushes into portals. And we didn't want to be that, it just, there's no fun in it. It's just a horrible existence.
Yeah. And is that's my perception of the public sector recruitment that I was exposed to, is that it's a kind of portal abyss type stuff. Do you still feel there's room to be a true partner in the right places?
100%.
Yeah.
Because the public sector is so large.
Yeah.
There are loads of pockets where you can be truly consultative in terms of, gearing up staffing. We're working with a big government body at the moment who is about to pick up a massive piece of work for them. And, we are building a proper recruitment plan with them.
Yeah.
Which is difficult times. Yeah, but it's nice to have.
Yeah, but it's why you get into the job.
It is,
Do you know what I mean? It's the sort of recruitment that reaffirms your love for why you do it.
Yes.
Helping an organisation meet their goals through a coherent and ambitious staffing plan. Then delivering that,
Yeah.
The world has changed remarkably in 2 years. Tell me about your relationship with technology as an organisation, especially serving the public sector, which is not famously advanced, right? And I say that as a current user of the London Borough of Merton's parking website. But yeah, tell me about your relationship and your vision for technology and specifically AI. How is your view? How is the world changing as you see it?
Okay. So I think the first thing is I, like many people in my position, are latching on to technological advances.
Yeah.
Purely because there's very little growth in the economy as such. So where else are you going to find that extra niche and opportunity?
Yeah.
So we've embarked, we did a lot of change during COVID. I think up until then we were a kind of pile 'em high, sell 'em cheap type merchant. We had large offices, a lot of headcount in there. And we were on this treadmill of, monthly hiring sessions and getting them in and losing half of them in 12 months. And it was just all too painful.
Yeah.
COVID allowed us to reset. And one of the strands we picked off coming out of COVID was tech and how we were going to do it. We made a CRM shift and it kind of got us moving in the right direction, but it didn't give us what we wanted. And then last October, we shifted everything. We got a new onboarding tool. We got a new CRM, new pay and bill. And we did the whole lot in one fell swoop, which is pretty painful.
Yeah.
But here we are now 7 months later, and we're now starting to see the benefit of it.
Yeah.
My view is we're going to fight this battle on two fronts. One is by having the very best people.
Yeah.
And as we drive up the value chain as a business, which is the area that AI is going to consume last, I should imagine, we still firmly believe that it's about human interaction. It's about knowing the candidate. It's about knowing where they want to go next and why that's important to them and the value they can bring to the client.
Yeah.
And that's a human interaction. At the same time, the complexity that's been brought into the recruitment world over the last 25 years, probably from the advent of job boards to where we are now, we see AI and automation, probably more than anything at the moment, stripping that away to free up our consultants to go off and do the consultative side. That's the theory anyway. Now, as we all know, that is actually more challenging because the more time you you effectively give back to them, aren't you actually getting that return in consultative behaviours?
And I think that's, the stick with which the CIOs that I know beats their people around the head with is, irrespective of how much money we spend on technology, the yield remains flat.
Yeah.
So why spend more?
Yeah.
And of course, what they're trying to say is, can AI finally be the lever that allows them to improve consultant yields? Because, Hinterview's a good example. We say, we will save your average recruiter 2 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
Because we do all your admin for you, blah, blah, blah. And people say to me, well, okay, but the only real evidence that it's a worthwhile investment is, will that 2 hours, are we giving them back 2 hours to have a long lunch break?
Yeah.
Or will they actually do more work? And not more work, but better work. And obviously the ambition and the hope is that AI, it liberates us. It liberates us from the part of the job we all hate.
Yeah.
Updating the CRM, writing CV cover sheets, writing emails, but it allows us to focus on the part of the job that A, we got into it in the first place, and B, that makes real money, closest to the client, closest to the money. But the historical evidence is overwhelming that irrespective of the technological advances we make, productivity remains incredibly hard to shift. And that's a real interesting conundrum for a lot of recruitment leaders, is how do we impact that individual item, yield productivity per head? And I feel like we're just at the beginning of that. We don't know yet.
We don't. And I do think that's the interesting part, because it will be different models, it will be different ways of working.
Yeah.
And, I've got great sympathy for people who that is their job, as in consulting on a day-to-day basis, to find, to make recruitment placements.
Yeah.
Because the world's very different to the one we grew up in.
Yeah.
In terms of, you really felt you could do something wonderful. And, there was a kind of unwritten agreement, that if you work really hard at this, one, you're going to get to here, but secondly, you'll be able to buy your first flat or a nice car or whatever it is. And I'm not sure some of those incentives fully line up either.
Yeah. And I guess, look, you've got a business in India, or an office in India. Tell us about offshoring, outsourcing, if that's what it is. I'd love to hear about strategically the vision of that or the USP of that.
Okay, so offshoring was the forerunner for automation, really. It was about, again, how can we strip out the stuff that is holding our consultants back? And where you've got a particularly expensive recruiter who is particularly talented, you don't want them writing all the job ads and all the other stuff. And that's where the India thing came in. It started on our support side. Morgan Hunt, we run our own payroll. We pay all our staff. We think that's really important. It's part of the brand of the business that everybody gets paid on a Friday. Yeah. No temporary worker doesn't get their money at Morgan Hunt. Everybody gets it.
Right.
And the ripple effect of that is quite amazing.
Yeah.
But some of those duties were offshore to India, etc. And then we've built some of the soft consulting side in. But it's not a gimme. You've got to really work at those relationships. And we initially sort of made a couple of breakthroughs with it, and we gave everybody in India a resourcer.
Right, okay.
Quickly stepped back from that position because, just telling people what to do on a Monday and then going back on a Friday to see what they'd done was not it. You need that contact.
But strategically, is globalization part of your plan? Because I guess PubSec is a weird one, right? Because it's by definition geographically constrained.
Yeah.
So, I think if I look at S3, they're working with JP Morgan in London. It's very easy to say to JP Morgan in New York, hey, this guy's moving over there. Can we be your first client, right?
Yeah.
So that's often, international expansion happens often by accident. But obviously you probably don't have that accidental lever that happens. So tell me about your thoughts on that.
So we're very much a UK-focused business.
Yeah.
That said, we have the offshoring out in India. We also have a quite strong business which brings qualified social workers from outside of the UK into the UK.
Right.
So that's as far as our geographical expansion goes. We are playing around with South Africa, Philippines to do some sales work.
Right, okay.
We're not convinced on that. That's something we're working through at the moment.
Got it. But you don't ever see yourself working with the
Port Authority of
That's
Sydney?
what I mean. Exactly. Or the Harbour Authority of New Jersey. That kind of, that's not part of the vision. You don't see.
No. Once upon a time, Morgan Hunt did embark on a global journey.
Yeah.
And I think some of the scars of that loom pretty large within the business.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things is know thyself. And I think sometimes, particularly when things get tough, it's tempting to go, look, we could be in Austin next week. What are we doing here? But really, we're a public sector recruitment business. The public sector market is enormous.
Yes.
Be good at it.
Yeah.
Focus at it. Do the right thing.
Yeah. My last question really is about the future.
Yeah.
It's been a challenging few years. COVID, then you had the post-COVID chaos of, people printing money. That all came to a sudden halt, and then everybody's been sort of, what the hell is going on? What are you seeing out there today? Are there signs of recovery? Are there green shoots for you? And what do you see the next? We've got a new government, relatively new government. What do you see the next 3 to 5 years looking like, both for you and for the broader recruitment market?
So I was at a board meeting 3 or 4 weeks ago, and our non-exec director said, the problem with you lot is you're always so bloody optimistic. And
sounds very much like my boards.
We're always like, oh, don't worry, next month's going to be fantastic. All we need to do is hire another 20 people and everything will be okay. So I am conscious about that, and I think there is part of that which is inherent in every recruitment business because it's the only way you would do it. But when I look at the figures, we hit a low point in April. And I think that was probably the bottom of the barrel, which is probably the NI changes, end of financial year. That said, I do not have a crystal ball. I do not know which coffers are going to be emptied next to pay for the next raft of whatever it is coming in, whether it's defence or what have you. So I think we've got to be really smart and sensible. At the same time, we are fully aware of the size of the prize out there. And we believe as a player in that market, we genuinely offer a decent service to the people who use us. We really care about what we're doing. I think one of the great things about working at Morgan Hunt is if you get that placement right, you put the right person into that job, it genuinely makes a difference, not just to the candidate, but to the client. But also, most of the positions we fill, there is an end user, whether it's a student or a patient or somebody in a tenant in a social housing block or something. So we do get the opportunity to make a difference by the job we do. And I think it's sticking close to that. There will be pockets of funding that get released, and we need to be smart about going for the right things that fit in with the expertise we have in-house. So, and also this country, it needs to keep going, and public service is a big part of that. And I think one of the challenges is for the government is they've got to find a way of fixing public service effectively. They can't keep taxing and offering worse and worse facilities to the hard taxed individuals of this country. They've got to start doing something, and we want to be part of fixing that by putting the right people in the right positions.
I think that's a inspiring way to end.
Cracking.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real eye opener, and hopefully you'll will join me again sometime. We can see how it's all going.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks
Thank
for inviting
you so much.
me.